can see people joining. Welcome for those that are arriving. We're gonna wait a couple of minutes, 2 minutes, so we can get everybody in the room, and let's start this awesome panel. While you wait, feel free to grab a cup of water so you can enjoy this panel the best way possible. Okay, people are still joining. Let's give them 2 more minutes and then we go ahead and kick off. All right, I guess we have quorum. So hello, everyone. I hope you're doing fine. It's a great pleasure to have you here for the second day of this awesome Pipefy Summit. And I'd like to welcome you to our panel, which is how to create a sustainable organization in an unstable world. I'm very happy to have you all here with me, along with Ben Cain, Vice President Operations and Finance at Urban Remedy, as well as Felipe Scholz, Carbon Expert at Sinai Technologies. Let me just go ahead and quickly introduce myself, and I'll pass the mic to Felipe and Ben for them to introduce themselves as well. So you all can call me Leo. My name is Leonardo. I've been at Pipefy for 5 years. I'm currently leading our outbound sales motion for Latin America. Prior to that, I was in a governance team, a topic that we are going to explore a little bit today. I'm a major in economics and an enthusiast of processes, operations, lean management, a couple of the topics we're going to be bringing to the panel as well. Ben, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Ben Cain. I'm the Senior Vice President at Urban Remedy. And a little bit about my background. I did my undergraduate studies at Stanford University. I then worked in the nonprofit sector for a few years and then got my MBA at UC Berkeley. I'm currently residing in Costa Rica with my family. I have an interest in Latin America. Spent a few years in different countries in Latin America. My specialty really on the professional front is for-profit companies that have a social mission. So really social entrepreneurship in the food sector. And so this is venture-backed companies from $5 million to maybe $100 million that are working to change our food systems and improve health. So that's my focus, and I'm excited to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. A pleasure to have you here. Felipe, the stage is yours.
Hi, Leo. Thank you very much for the invite to join Pipefy Summit. I'm a carbon expert at Sinai Technologies. Sinai is a decarbonization platform. We help companies to build their GHG inventories, project their emissions into the future, build solid decarbonization plans, and use internal carbon pricing mechanisms to basically help them hit their emission reduction targets on the long run. I'm an enthusiast of carbon strategy and carbon markets. I love talking about entrepreneurship, diversity and inclusion, slow growth mindset, and minimalism. And I've been helping customers to solve challenges using technologies for more than 5 years now. Before Sinai, I was working at Pipefy, so it's a pleasure being here today.
Cool. Thank you to have you back, Felipe. Awesome. Just a few reminders before we officially start. So I just want to remind everybody that we have interpretation available, so you can find the button for it on the center of your Zoom screen. Apart from that, feel free to send your questions on the Q&A session. We're going to have a Q&A session in the end, but you can send your questions during the presentation, and we'll answer them accordingly. Apart from that, I just wanted to thank you all again for your participation, and to go ahead and kick off our panel here. I'd love to learn a little bit more from both of you. You're both working at amazing companies. I got to know recently, but I already admire. I'd love to know what led you. Actually, I'd love to know more about Urban Remedy itself, right? And what led you to join the company. And later, Felipe, the same thing for Sinai.
Sure. So what Urban Remedy, the focus of Urban Remedy is to basically improve our food system. So in the United States and really globally, we live in a world of what we call big food. And so a lot of where people are getting their food is from these large food companies whose primary motive is to optimize profit and are not directly involved or responsible for improving health. And what we've seen in the United States, and the reason I got involved in Urban Remedy and food was reports that my children's generation in the United States is expected to live shorter lives than my generation. And shorter lives is ultimately comes down to food and exercise. And so I started my food career working at a company called Revolution Foods, which was working to improve healthy school lunches in poor schools across the United States. And then about 6 years ago, so at Revolution Foods, when I joined the company, we were about 40 employees. We scaled to about 2,000. And I wanted to take the experience I had at Revolution Foods and apply it to another company because I really enjoy small companies and startups. So Urban Remedy is focused on providing organic, clean food. Our goals are having convenient food, having clean food. And by clean, we mean food that's non-GMO, that is, as I said, organic and fresh. We have no preservatives in our food. We make salads, juices, healthy bars. We distribute them at our own retail stores and across supermarkets across the United States. One of the slogans that we talk about is that we'd rather pay the farm for healthy, fresh food than we would pay the pharmacy for drugs or other things to address the fact that we, as a culture, are eating poor quality food. And so I really believe that one of the biggest changes that we can make for the environment and for owner health is good eating practices. And that's why I'm at Urban Remedy.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. Pretty noble reason, as well as a very delicious one. It made my mouth water. And for those who don't know, we do have an Urban Remedy store here in Brazil. And I guess it's located in São Paulo, right? So highly recommend that as well. Cool. Felipe, now moving perspectives, talking more environmental. I'm curious to understand more about Sinai, as well as what made you move to this company?
So early this year, I joined Sinai. So my former boss introduced me to Maria Fujihara, that is Sinai's founder and CEO. And we talked about the company's challenge to help create a new category for decarbonization as a service. And the main goal here was to help like carbon intensive companies like steel manufacturing plants, chemicals, transportation. So companies that burn a lot of fuel and emit a lot of emissions, help those companies to first understand how much emissions they have. So understand their carbon footprint. And second, understand how much it would cost them to reduce their emissions. So the cost piece here is kind of like game changing. You might see for the kind of like past few months, a lot of companies committing that they will become carbon neutral, they will reduce their emissions until 2030, 2050, but no one knows how much that will cost. So when I saw the challenge and I saw that the impact on helping companies to understand all of that context, but really be able to hit their targets and not only commit and make it public available, it really kind of like caught my attention, because I think it was a challenge that could impact not only these companies, but like the entire society and also future generations. So that's when I kind of thought it was a no-brainer decision, and then I decided to take the challenge and join Sinai.
Awesome. Thank you, Felipe. Very interesting stories. And I guess we're going to be bringing a lot of insights from those journeys to our discussion. Jumping right ahead into our discussion, I love to touch on our first topic, which is the instability part, right? I guess when we talk about instability, it's inevitable not to bring the pandemic to the debate, because the coronavirus has spotlighted how we are living in a very unpredictable world. And I guess we're not just talking about health issues, right? We're talking economics, we're talking geopolitics, we're talking climate change, we're talking social tension, just to name a few of those topics that bring unpredictability as well as instability to our current world. And I love to understand from both of you, I guess you have a career in business and you're interacting with different customers, vendors, as well as employees. A very broad question for us to start, but in your perspective, what are the main challenges entrepreneurs might face when creating, developer, or scaling companies in the current moment, right? Where you have a lot of tension, again, a lot of variables in this process. So I'd love to learn from your perspective, what are the key challenges you guys are seeing for the upcoming generations of companies that are being born? I guess you're muted. Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Sure. So, just to speak a little bit about Urban Remedy's experience, I feel like there has been two stages. So the first stage was the critical stage as COVID began to affect our business. And we're a food manufacturer. We make all of our food fresh. We have a large workforce that makes our food, delivers our food. And so, the first and foremost was for us to balance, how do we protect our employees? So, while other companies may be able to go completely virtual, we can't. We have our employees in our kitchens making our food, and if we don't make our food, we can't operate as a company. So a lot of it was focused on how do we protect. And I think one of the advantages is we actually had in retrospect was, as a food company, we already have very good sanitation procedures. Employees can't come in sick. Employees have to wear masks, wear gloves, wash hands. So all those practices were standard practices. And one of the things I'm really proud of is throughout the course of COVID, so we have about 400 employees. We had about 80 employees who had COVID, but 79 of those cases, they contracted COVID outside of the office. We only had one case of transmission between employees, and it was right at the beginning of the COVID virus. And so it involved us, we did this partly by training, education, doing things like creating different lunch shifts, creating small groups of people that would work together so that if one of them had contracted COVID, we could put that group on quarantine and have them at home for 14 days. But we wouldn't have to put our entire team on quarantine because we knew that only a small group could have possibly had cross-contamination. I think these measures, were a challenge for a company. They were expensive for a company, but it also helped build, I think, allegiance and loyalty because the company, of course, knew we were working very hard to take care of them and protect them. COVID also affected our supply chain and our business. So as all companies, I think, throughout the world have seen, COVID has huge disruptions to the supply chain. We had it as well. And we also had a situation where people's buying habits changed in the United States. A lot of what our business relies on is people out shopping, saying, oh, I'm going to go by this store and get lunch, or while I'm at the grocery store, I'll also get a healthy salad, fresh salad. Well, under COVID, people would grocery shop perhaps once or twice a month. They would buy directly items for home, and a lot of these were durable goods. They weren't fresh salads because people wanted rice and flour, and they were sort of hunkering down under COVID. I think the lessons that we had from that experience were always, of course, coming back to our values, making sure that we're operating, even in a time of challenge, that we're operating in ways that represent our company's values. I think it's important that we make hard decisions quickly. I think that, in a startup environment, cash is king. We within 2 weeks of COVID, we reduced our offerings by 1/3. We simplified our business because we knew that it's better to simplify now. And listen, maybe if this passed in a month, we could offer everything we used to offer. But if we made that decision early on, we could operate a simpler business more effectively. So I think making hard decisions very quickly. There's a few other things that we could get into, but I want to make sure that Felipe has time. One of the interesting things coming out, and we can talk about this a little bit later, is this a different value set of our employees. So many of you may have heard of the term the Great Resignation. Now that COVID has passed, a lot of employees are rethinking what they want to do in their lives. And I think that the value set that a company has, a lot of people are saying, listen, I worked hard, I earned money, but I don't like this job. I don't like what this company does. And I do think that people are shifting now to look for jobs that have a value and match their own goals in their life. Felipe.
Sure. So I think, Ben, to add to that, definitely, I would say the pandemic has increased a lot the pressure on leadership to deliver even more value to stakeholders, right? And the more often we'll see that business and operating kind of models, we have to focus on stakeholder centricity. So they will need to do that through tangible commitments. And I think that will be the kind of foundation for the shift. But the challenges I see are kind of three here. Of course, there are more, but I would highlight three. The first one is to understand what developments will kind of influence the current and future state. So that's really hard to understand from your business, which ones will be the kind of affecting you the most. The understanding you have about your supply chain, for example, is key to kind of prepare for future challenges. Second one is still the long-term thinking. So kind of leaving the short-term profit maximization aside and favoring the long-term value. This is totally something common on kind of scaling businesses. And last but not least, maybe this is a world kind of thing, but I will speak more for Brazil and Latam. I think the growing inequality, it will be a very big challenge for companies because it will be harder and harder to find qualified professionals because we have been taking the access from people to go to good universities and have a good education. And whenever companies will need to kind of hire good professionals 5, 10, 15 years down the road, there will be scarcity in the market for sure. So that's a big challenge I think people are kind of not preparing for.
And if I could add to that last point, Felipe, I guess when we talk about going remote, especially in development countries, we can see that not only we have scarcity in terms of labor, but also we are exporting a lot of this labor, right, to developed countries. So we're facing a lot of challenges when hiring, because here we are talking, first of all, the value set, right? As Ben has positioned, people are looking for a solid culture that will remain solid even in times of instability. So how to create that in order to attract top talent, or rather but also how do you compete with developed countries and developed economies in order to retain and attract these talents, right? So I guess recruitment is a big piece of that, but also the retention part is going to be a challenge as well. So I love the points you guys brought. We're talking about habits changing on the consumer side. We're talking about a decision-making process being changed, and what is the process tool set you need to create to ensure that this decision make is going to be responsible, but also quick, right? So there's a big trade-off in there. We're talking about more lean operations in terms of putting the customer in the center, removing waste when delivering this value, and having all the stakeholders accountable across the process. And I really like the points that Scholz said, especially how to leverage the long-term thinking with so much on the short term going on, right? And but especially the tangible commitment piece, I guess this is something that is coming to stay, right? So just to give my perspective on what we are seeing here at Pipefy, the recruitment piece has been a very big challenge, and I guess that for other companies here in Latin America, it would be the same. And just to bring a summary of what we discussed. Ben, I saw you with the mic unmuted. I don't know if you have anything to add, but otherwise feel free to do so. No?
Well, I just want to add that, you know, in the United States, we also have a huge recruitment challenge as well. Urban Remedy operates in the San Francisco Bay Area, so we're sort of at the U.S. center of venture capital and entrepreneurship, and us and every other company can't easily attract the talent that we want to. So I really think it's a global phenomenon right now.
Yeah, very good point. Global challenge, and there's no right answers at the moment, right? I guess every business leader is thinking on how to solve that. And I'd love to bring another topic to the discussion, which is also a big challenge, right? Which is this challenge has been around for a while now, and we see that it's becoming more and more urgent. And I guess part of that was in Felipe's speech, which is sustainability, right? We're going to talk about more down the road of why is this becoming more and more pressing. But for us to start, I'd love to understand from a personal perspective, what does sustainability means? What does it mean to be a sustainable company? We know we have a formal definition, right, which is meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs as well. But leaving formal concepts aside, I love to get a personal perspective on what does that mean for you at personal level and at the professional level as well. Any inputs here, team?
I would say, Leo, I think like in the broadest way as possible, I would say that sustainability like refers to the ability of maintaining, right, and sustaining something or itself over time. But if you bring that perspective to the table and break that into kind of like three main pillars, you would say it's about the economics, the environmental, and the social aspect. That could also be known as profits, planet, and people, right? So that would be a very simplistic way to put it, but it's easy to understand where we're kind of focusing. And if we talk about corporate sustainability, that would be kind of like one level below. We could say that companies, they should not only, and it's not only about environmentalism, but it's as a company, I could conduct my business and I could make business in a way that would either impact environment or it would impact society or it would impact both, right? That's possible. It's just a matter of kind of like wanting to do so.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'm totally in line with you. And I guess this is the big change we're seeing, right? And extrapolating the concept to the social aspect, to the environmental aspect, and not just thinking, okay, a sustainable company is that it's a company that is financially sustainable, right? So how do you take these other perspectives and create a plan on top of that, Ben?
So I share with Felipe, generally that same description. Sometimes it's referred to as the triple bottom line of not only profit but also environment and social. And for me, principally, I come from the perspective of I see for-profit companies as a mechanism to achieve social good, and that having a for-profit structure does allow you perhaps a little bit more easily to generate investment and also have a measurable feedback. One of the challenges I had in the nonprofit sector was if you're serving this population over here, but this other population is providing you the funding, then you don't have a good way to know if you're having the impact that you want. But as a for-profit company, if we make salads and no one likes them, they're not going to buy them. And if they don't believe the quality and the benefit of those products, they're not going to buy them. So there's immediate feedback around the utility and the value of your products that I support in the for-profit model. But I think what I'd really like to get into this conversation, though, is how do you construct that company? To me, that's what's most interesting. All of us, it's very easy to say, of course, we want a business that generates money and also helps the environment and helps the social, our communities. But the question is, how do you construct that? What are the tools? What are the learnings? And that's what I hope we can get into today.
Awesome, Ben. And I guess we're moving to our next theme, which is ESG, right? We talked about a few acronyms here before, but I guess this is one that is becoming more and more top of mind for both business and their leaders. And just quickly introducing, for those who may not be familiar with the term, ESG is short for environmental, social, and governance. So pretty similar to the perspective Felipe brought to the table. And if I could summarize what it means at a high level, it basically represents a more conscious and stakeholder-centric way of doing business, right? And this is being introduced by the market as putting pressures on the business to understanding how you guys do business. What are you thinking about? Like, how conscious are you about the entire process and ecosystem around your company? And just to name a few of the topics that compose each one of those pillars, right? So when we talk environmental, we were talking basically about the preservation of our natural world. When we talk about social, we're talking about consideration of humans and its interdependencies. And when we talk about governance, we're talking about processes, mechanisms, policies, the way we process data, the way we leverage data, right? So these are the main themes under each one of those pillars. And on that, I'd love to know, first of all, what are you guys seeing as a trend in terms of ESG? Because we know that this is becoming more and more hyped, let's put it this way, even though the term it dates back from 2005, we've seen this becoming more hyped during the last decade and now more than ever, pretty much given this instability, right? So what is different now? And I guess this goes back to what Ben has said, right? Everybody can say that they can do more sustainable business, but people want to know, like, what are the tangible commitments, as Felipe said, you are doing. So I see this toolbox as a tangible way or a guideline, at least, right, that can guide this business into practice. And how can you go from the theory to practice? So the first question here is, what has changed since 2005 or since last decade to now with the pandemics, and why is sustainability and the whole ESG framework becoming more and more pressing?
So I'll start out. For me, I think it's, to answer your last question first, Leo, I think it's becoming pressing because I really do think that our world and humanity is at this inflection point. When I grew up, we talked about climate change as something that scientists thought was going to happen, right? But today we're seeing it happen within a generation, and we all, I think, see the fact that our world is a limited resource, and we're using up that resource at a rate that is not cannot be continued. So I think that the pressure on all business to take into effect our impact on the environment, our impact on society and inequality are all things that become increasingly relevant. And the COVID has exacerbated this. At least I can speak to the United States. The wealthy got wealthier and the poor got poorer in the last 2 years. And that, the United States used to be a country where the middle class really thrived, and we're seeing that disappear over time. Getting to your other point, Leo, of how this has happened, I would like to talk a little about the governance piece, because to me, I think that's really where it starts. That a company's impact and ability to continue to impact through the life of the company really depends on how the company is set up, what are the values that company has, and who's leading it. And so I really believe that the board members that you choose to be on the board of your company have a big impact. The investors that you choose have a big impact. And it's hard to make decisions early on around investment because any investment you get comes with different strings attached, comes with different amounts of money. But if you can have an aligned group of investors that believe in your social mission from the beginning, it's critical to the development of your company. And I've seen that time and time again, where that alignment amongst your board and investors is critical. The second piece I see is just within the leadership company of how does the company speak about its values? How do the leaders of the company speak about their values? Do they have those hard conversations early on within a company to say, listen, we made a mistake. We have a commitment to the environment, but we launched this product maybe with packaging that didn't help the environment. And so let's correct that. Let's fix that because that doesn't fit with our values. And I think that when the leadership publicly makes those choices, it sends a message to the rest of the company around what kind of decisions should be made. The third topic is just actually around the legal structure of a company. So one of the trends that we're seeing in the United States is both a certification process as well as a legal status. So there's a company called B Corp, and they do certifications for companies. And so the certification is between $500 to thousands of dollars, depending on the size of the company. And it starts with a process to basically evaluate your company's impact to the environment, to your community. And it basically does an assessment and you achieve a score. And in order to get the certificate, you have to have a score of at least 80. It's a pretty intensive, survey. It took us a couple of days dividing amongst ourselves, a lot of detailed questions. And I found this really useful myself because it gave an outside view on topics that sometimes I wasn't aware of. So for instance, because of this, we implemented a volunteer program where each of our employees gets 8 hours a year to volunteer paid by the company on any issue. Because it was one of the questions in the surveys: does the company sponsor paid volunteer work? Is it formally part of our benefit program? And we added that based on the survey that we took. So there are hundreds of companies in Latin America that are also B Corp certified. So it's just not a US certification, it's a global certification. It's very helpful. So if you're not familiar with it, please look it up at B Corp. And I think, Leo, we might have a chance to attach some links. The second change on governance is in the United States, it's state by state, but about 30 to 40 states now allow you to incorporate as a benefit corporation. So Urban Remedy is in this process. So we certified as a C Corp, and a C Corp is a legal status, established shareholders, it establishes a board, and there are certain bylaws that all C Corps have to follow. But one of those bylaws is that the directors of the company have to make decisions to maximize company value. And therefore, the board members are legally held to maximizing the value, which means if you have a decision to maximize profit that might destroy the environment, legally, the board should make the decision, as long as it's legal, should make the decision to maximize profit. A benefit corporation is this legal structure that says that actually boards of directors have to maximize the three aspects of ESG. So environment, social, and governance. And so it provides legal support and an obligation for directors to meet all three of those. And so it's a legal structure that we're in the process of moving to as a company that further supports decisions amongst the triple bottom or for triple bottom line companies.
Awesome. Thank you for the amazing overview, Ben. You've told me the story and the process your guys are going through from being a B Corp to a benefit corporation. Just adding more color to those who are listening to us. So the B corporation concept was created in 2006. So pretty much right after the creation of ESG, and was created by B Labs. I guess someone already sent in the chat, and it basically was trying to redefine the notion of success for corporations, right? Because it was ultimately anchored in terms of profit, and there's much more than that, or there's better ways to achieving that profit, right? So it overlaps very well with the ESG concept, and I guess it's a very practical way of getting there, right? And just to name a few famous B corporations, we're talking Ben & Jerry's, The Body Shop, Patagonia, and here in Brazil, Natura. It's also a famous one. So just to give some color into that. And I'll go back to this theme, but first I'd love to hear from Scholz, just going back to the whole ESG trend. Why is this becoming more and more pressing now in your perspective, Scholz?
Sure, and I think it makes total sense, like what I'm gonna say with the concepts Ben brought to the conversation, because I think it's all about like governance and how companies structure their ESG programs. So I think like because of the COVID situation, it affected like directly and indirectly like billions of people and also companies. Focusing only on companies here, I think these organizations, they face many challenges and they had to make like immediate decisions, right? And understandably, the present was prioritized because of the whole situation. But navigating into like these complex scenarios will require companies to balance into responding crisis into the present, right? So compensating the short term, but also they will have to kind of like maintain the resilience to the long term. So that's the challenge. And I think once you have a good governance around it, and you build a strong ESG program, I think this will be key for like the long-term strategy and survival of the company, because while companies will have to over and over deal with immediate challenges like COVID, for example, they also have these strong ESG programs that will support them to kind of like reduce impact for future crises. They will increase, for example, speed recovery because they will act faster. And they will also incentivize innovation that will play a key on how companies navigate the new normal, right? So having a structured program definitely help companies to kind of like navigate this. And I think COVID brought that up as a must-have and highlighted all the other aspects of ESG for sure. And
then
please, I would comment on climate change, but Go ahead.
That I love the perspective Ben brought on the governance piece, and I guess again the whole B corporation or the Sistema B here in Brazil brings a very practical framework to put a lot of the topics on the ESG into practice. And I love to get your perspective on the environmental piece, as you're closer to that, on what you're seeing companies are doing during this time, or what were they doing before, and how was that affected by the COVID?
Sure. So I think like making a hook from like ESG and focusing on the environmental piece on climate change. Of course, there's many aspects, but I think climate change is one of the biggest one that will impact most of the companies. And also, like Ben said, we have been hearing and reading about climate change for years now, but now it's the time where we are seeing that happening. And even though people might or might not believe on that, that's real. It's already here. So the last report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it's called IPCC. It's an important institution that kind of like regulates, or not regulates, but kind of like communicates the impacts of climate change. I'm quoting them now. They said climate change is widespread, rapid, and intensifying, and some trends are now irreversible. So basically what they mean is they gave us a code red for humanity, right? So we are in a bad place right now. And when talking about climate change, there's an important concept that we need to understand, that is, as a society, there is an international agreed threshold of like global heating that is 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. So that basically means that we cannot let our planet heat up more than 1.5 degrees. Otherwise, the impacts and disasters will be unimaginable. And to do so, we not only need governments to act. So for example, if we take into comparison in South America, Brazil is one of like the worst countries managing its climate risks and climate agenda right now. Mexico is doing way better. Colombia is doing way better. They already have like carbon taxes being implemented in Argentina as well. In Brazil, still deforestation is a subject that is kind of like putting us in a very bad position. But we also need like players from the private sector, companies like Bayer, Siemens, ArcelorMittal, that are all clients from and customers from Sinai, to play an important role on that. And to do so, I think that's where kind of like we help customers to overcome their climate challenges. So our product basically help them to understand, again, how much will their emissions cost and how they can lower their emissions over time. So they can not only like mitigate their climate risks, understand their carbon exposure, right? But also generate an impact in the society and kind of like lead that transformation. And I've seen more and more often companies that take the first step and are the first one to kind of like commit to decarbonization targets and really implement solutions and move from a fossil fuel economy to a low carbon economy. Definitely, there's a huge impact on the shareholder and share price for sure. Like totally, we have seen that very often.
Cool. And now that we have a perspective from an environmental angle, as well as the governance piece, tying this to the challenges we're seeing, we're talking companies are going remote, we're having distributed workforces. And we know that the way we apply these policies might change depending on where you are, right? And if you have, for instance, Urban Remedy has a few stores here in Brazil. I know you guys from Sinai work with very large customers. They have multiple plants around the world. I'd love to understand how sustainability varies regionally, right? You might have a cross-functional program, but perhaps it might vary depending on where your branches are and how each of these policies are applied. So is this a challenge for you guys there, Ben? Like you see things you can do in the States you cannot do in here, or you might apply it differently. The same thing for you, Felipe. How do you see your customers responding to that as well?
I mean, it's certainly a challenge. One of them is just around recycling and recyclability. So one of the decisions that we made, and this kind of gets into the complexity of environmental sustainability. It's a really, when you kind of, so at a high level, one might say recycling plastic is good to do, right? Of course. we should always recycle plastic. But as those of you who are involved in this world might know, there are thousands of different plastic compounds. Most plastic products have layers of different types of plastic in them, which essentially make them impossible to be recycled. But also, so Urban Remedy moved about 3 years ago to using 100% post-recycled content, including plastic. So all of our plastic that we use for our plastic bottles has already been recycled. However, some counties and states that we operate in, they don't further recycle that plastic, because since it's post-recycled plastic, they won't then take it and recycle it. So is it better to use plastics that's already been recycled and can't be recycled a second time? Or is it better to use virgin plastic that then can be recycled? These are the challenges. And if even within the United States, if we had a single national standard around recycling, it would make it much easier, but we don't. It's very localized. So, that's one of the challenges that we have around the environmental piece of it. It takes using experts, leaning on experts who, we're not the first company who's come across this problem. And so to find a team of contacts, we work with local universities on this around, trying to research either new compounds, new products, or also ways to use waste streams. Sometimes that's a great opportunity because there's groups at business schools, universities, and you can put a team on a project for 6 months or 12 months as part of a school project. And we've had really good results with that.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. We have a few questions here coming from the audience. Felipe, feel free to comment on that. And I have a question for you right away.
Sure. I'll just comment on kind of like how different countries they face different challenges. I think after the COP26, that is the United Nations Climate Change Conference that happened I think 1 month ago, reducing emissions in the supply chain has become more and more often a challenge for companies. And now everyone is kind of like being responsible for also helping on where they are kind of emitting. So since we operate in a globalized market, at least in the industry, we have been working on customers. For example, if I sell to Europe and my European buyer, they want to reduce their scope 3 emissions, that basically means my emissions that come from my suppliers. Brazil, for example, selling soy, we will also have to reduce their emissions so they can sell a low carbon intense soy, for example. So because of that, I think like every country will need to kind of like, or every company will need to kind of like start collaborating on reducing emissions, and not only reducing your own emissions. So that will be like kind of like the next big challenge for sure. And just on terms of the question from David Cain, if Sinai takes into consideration the social cost of carbon emission into our assessment along the cost of reducing emissions for our clients, yes, we do. Just in terms of like concepts, social cost of carbon is an estimate in like USD, for example, in dollars, of the economic impacts that keeping emitting CO2 or greenhouse gases into the atmosphere would cause, right? So that basically help policymakers and like decision makers understand the economic impact of decisions that would increase or decrease their emissions. This is something you can model in our system and apply into kind of like climate scenario analysis, how that will impact your future business if something changes.
Cool. And then on that, one more for you guys. Question from the audience, which is, what countries do you see leading the way towards emissions reduction, and what are the tools they have available for them to do so? And I guess this is more for you, Felipe, but Ben, feel free to jump into that as well.
I would say that I wouldn't be able to kind of like point at one country, but I would say in Europe, things are kind of like changing rapidly, more than other countries, because CO2 emissions and the climate agenda there is something that is trending, different from kind of like other countries that the policymakers are not kind of like deploying legislations that they should, or even like third world country where they have full economies based on fossil fuels, right? So I would say, and also that compares, for example, to states in the US. California is a state that is leading the climate agenda in the US. So it really depends, it's regional. But if you want to take a look on companies that are kind of like leading that, I think Siemens is one of the companies that is way far ahead of other organizations. And they're really kind of like switching all their process or their energy sources to kind of like low carbon technology. And it's impressive how they have been doing that so fast. Not so fast, how they have been doing that. And it looks like it's fast, but they have been working with that for like many, many years. So they are preparing for a slow transition, and that's the best scenario, right? Can I make a slow transition? And when it comes to a time that, for example, we all need to stop using fossil fuels, my company is ready, instead of like in, I don't know, 2049 to 2050, you need to change everything. It will be super expensive, and probably the companies will be penalized for sure.
Cool. Thank you, Felipe. And just to answer Laurie, it's Siemens. I'll type that into the chat so you can look it up. But thank you for your answer, Felipe. Definitely something I'd love to dig deeper after our panel. And as we walk towards the end of our panel, I know there is the whole social aspect, which is very important, but unfortunately we won't have time, but perhaps we can touch on that on this last question that came from Fernando. And I love to hear a separate answer from both Ben and Felipe, which is, what's the one thing you're positive about 2022 progress towards a true sustainable agenda? And what's the one thing that concerns you? Who is taking that?
I'll start. It's youth, you know, it's our younger generations and their focus. And I think the tools, you know, under COVID, I know at least for my own children, they're more comfortable reaching out to different contacts, to be online, communicate with other youth around the world. And, you know, my challenge is that the older generations need to get out of the way for our newer generations, who are ultimately going to inherit the mess that we've left them.
Felipe?
Yeah, and my 2 cents on that, I think talking about a local perspective, I think it's impressive how like private companies are getting together. Like Sinai is part of a group called Climate Connection, that several like of the largest companies in the world are part of that. Bayer is part of that, Saint-Gobain, and so on and so forth. So it's interesting to see like the private sector is coming together to put pressure on governments to define like frameworks, to find financing opportunities, and so on and so forth. So companies want to decarbonize and want to lower their emissions related to the climate agenda. And I think definitely the biggest challenge in Brazil will be the government that is kind of like against all of that. So probably we see some changes next year, but having support from government institutions is definitely key for kind of like companies to operate better, but also achieve their results over time.
Awesome. Thank you, Felipe. Before we finish our panel here, I'd just love to share some of the links Ben has spoke about, Felipe has shared with me before. A lot of good content in these blogs and portals. So feel free to look up into that. Apart from that, well, we're unfortunately coming to an end to our discussion. I think it was a great conversation. I got some live feedback here. People were enjoying it. So Ben and Felipe, thank you all for your time in here. If you want to say something, feel free to do so. This is a moment for you, and then I'll give the rest of the audience instructions for what's to come on this Pipefy Summit.
I just want to thank Leo and the team here for putting this panel together. I think it's a great chance for at least for me to stand back and think about the work that we've done and get inspired by the work that other people like you, Felipe, are doing. And I would just encourage all attendees to continue driving this movement forward. I mean, our environment and the world that we give our children is really not going to be driven so much by other people's decisions in government, but really about what each of us bring each day to our work and our jobs and our day-to-day practices. So it's been a pleasure to be part of this. Thank you. Thank you, Leo. Thank you, Felipe.
Yeah, I share the same feeling as Ben. Leo, thank you for kind of like putting this together. Juliana Spinardi as well for sending the invitation and organizing such a great event. I think we need to create more and more opportunities to talk about ESG, because we are all learning. It's a new concept with new tools, new practices, and I think it will benefit everyone. So happy to keep chatting with anyone that kind of like wants to explore other perspectives. I think that's it. Congrats on the event, guys.
Thank you, team. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Felipe. I'm sure we are leaving this panel with a bunch of lessons. Thank you, everyone who was here with us and accompanied this discussion. The Pipefy Summit has just begun. We have an afternoon or a morning, depending on where you are, full of content. And our conversation doesn't end here. So feel free to join Pipefy Summit discussion in our community. Juliana has just shared the links, and you'll find a bunch of more interesting content in there as well. So thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great day and great Pipefy Summit. Bye-bye.